Hello and welcome back to Global Travel and Medical. I'm Deb, I'm a registered nurse and qualified psychotherapist, and I've worked quite a while in the NHS. My channel is basically about anything to do with the NHS, its politics, anything that's affecting the NHS, any news items. It's also about wellness and looking after yourself, anything to do with mental health, social issues, loneliness, anything that I can help with, I will, and I will add it to the channel as it's ongoing. But today I wanted to throw in a very quick video because I've got a significant anniversary this week. It was actually Monday, the 10th of March. It was actually my, 40th year as an NHS, well, as a training nurse and a qualified nurse. So my total NHS career has spanned 4 decades. Where has that time gone? I've no idea. Anyway, I wrote a short post that ended up being a long post that ended up even being longer. And I thought, you know what, I could do with this as a video. So if I can share it with you, I'd like to, mainly for the reason that whoever watches this, whether they're younger, older, any age really, even, young teens, pre-teens could watch this, because I'd like to secure some history. And eventually, again, as my channel grows and develops, I will have registered nurses who've worked in a variety of background, who are like me, have sort of trained in the old school way. So, a bit of background before I tell the story. I trained back in 1985, the 10th of March 85 to be exact. And I'd applied to 3 hospitals. So the Royal Liverpool, which asked for 5 O-levels, 2 A-levels, as everywhere did at that time. There were the odd few hospitals that asked for just 5 O-levels, but they were rare. Another place was Southport and Manchester, but they were big teaching hospitals, and I'll come back to that in a bit. And a smaller one, a little district general, that I was keen on, but I thought it's a bit out the way. I don't know if this is going to be okay to train. Will I get the breadth of experience? Anyway, it was Ormskirk in district general up in Lancashire, that is twinned with Wrightington. So Wrightington has a history of its own, because Professor Charnley worked there, and before he retired, it was his last couple of years when I went there as a student nurse for my 8-week placement, and he invented joint replacement surgery. So he pioneered the hip replacement, and they had a museum up there. I don't know if it's still there now. Drop it in the comments if anybody knows, of all the hips that he transplanted and worked on and failed. And he had them in the museum for people to see the progress that he made in inventing, joint replacements. So, Wrightington's got quite a history. And it was in beautiful grounds. There was an old manor house as well as the hospital. It was really sort of old school ex-TB type hospital back in the day, and a really beautiful place to, do a little bit of your training. Anyway, I digress. So back to Ormskirk. So I applied, bear with me, I'm just pulling up my post. When I applied, I got offered the Royal Liverpool Hospital, and when I went for my interview, it was massive. I mean, really big hospital. I got lost just trying to find the interview room in the School of Nursing. It was massive, and I felt a bit intimidated, really. I thought, I'm a young student nurse. I was a kid, just finished sixth form and things, and it was like, oh my God, I can't do this. So I went for my interview. I got offered a place. I also got offered a place at Fazackley in Liverpool. I got offered a place at Southport, but that was another story. And I got offered a place in Manchester. But again, I'll come back to that later in the story. Then when I thought, don't really want one of these three, Ormskirk came up. They had a place early. So instead of me starting July 85, I started in March. And I was one of 12. Two dropped out. So we had a little quorum of 10. Perfect. First day there, it was snowing. It was countryside. It was very picturesque. Nice trees, nice hills, farmland, all covered in snow. And the School of Nursing was on Rough Lane. Rough Lane was like the leafy part of the hospital, whereas the entrance to the hospital near A&E was on a main road through the town. And Ormskirk was a very little town back then, you know, with like one little wine bar, one little travel agency, a market, a W.H. Smith. You know, it was a nice little town. Anyway, I digress. I do this a lot. I applied, I got it, I got in, and my first day was all about collecting our uniform, where to drop them, where to get a key for your locker for your changing room, because you weren't allowed to wear your uniform out of the hospital back then. Where you could get your hats from, linen hats. Yes, I had a linen hat. Plain one for the first 12 weeks of my training, or PTS, preliminary training school. You did an exam. If you passed it, which we all did, you went on and got your one stripe. So no stripes in a student uniform. You were like the bottom of the pile. And you were based in school only. So it was a case of, you know, this is a hospital, this is where you go for this is where you go for that, get your contract, blah, blah, blah. And as that week went on, you know, we learned about what was in the hospital, how a hospital functions, etc., etc. And it was good. You know, it's very different to today's training. But I think we've lost something by not having that. Knowing how a hospital functions, especially understanding how the culture works, how wards function, where you go for what, you know, are vital things to know what is available in a hospital and what's there for you. You know, you have to know where to get this, where to get that, just in case an unexpected emergency arises. Anyway, I'm going on now. So let me just have a look at my little piece and I'll read it out to you. And I've even got my old school pictures on there. Can you believe it? This is on Facebook. Okay. Monday the 10th of March 1985, I started my SRN stroke RGN nurse training. Now I say that because the SRN was still available at that time. The RGN, or Registered General Nurse training, was just coming in. And there was a fundamental difference to the exam and some of the modules that enabled us to qualify. Now, because when we joined, the SRN curriculum was still in situ, we had the choice. So we did a vote, but this was like months on. This didn't affect us until our second year, so March 86. So for the SRN curriculum, it was a set of MCQs and multiple choice questions. That was your exam. For the RGN, it was the MCQs in the morning, and then you had a set of like extended essays and a project, and the project is handed in sort of 6 weeks before your exam. You had two exams, a hospital exam and a state final that was a national paper. And then in the afternoon, after these MCQs, you had your extended essays and you could pick two subjects. So mine were pain, which I went on to develop more academic qualifications in because it's appertaining to everybody. And what was it? Pain and cardiac arrest. Yeah, so everything to do with emergency situations, because again, it covers everything, every specialty within the NHS. Without your heart and lungs, you don't survive. You know, pain after operations or procedures or trauma is something, you know, that you have to learn to deal with. See, I'm going on again. Okay, so I started my SRN stroke RGN training. Back then, as new trainees, we wore hats. We were so new, we had no stripes on them either. That's what I was just saying about preliminary training school. The consultants taught us as well as our nurse tutors, which is true. Consultants used to come in and do some theory. So they would talk about medicine, so how to treat asthma, how to treat diabetes, how to treat MIs or myocardial infarction. They used to be called coronary thrombosis back then, but we know them as MIs or myocardial infarction or a heart attack. So then we'd have surgeons, then we'd have a gynecologist, whatever, and the consultants did a lot of your theory. And when you went out on the ward, they would ask you questions that you should know for, you know, whatever year you were in. And it was a case of God help you if you didn't know the answer. You know, they expected you to have some modicum of knowledge. Consultants asked us questions on ward rounds. Our clinical teachers worked with us and they also tested our knowledge. Add in the ward sisters who also set us homework, and they did, and woe betide you if you didn't know your drugs or whatever they'd set you to learn. Whether you were tired or not after 8 shifts or whatever, you had to go and revise. The ward sisters set us homework, and then we'd ask the house officer or junior doctor for a BNF. A BNF is a British National Formulary, and it's a drug book. A lot of them are online now, but they were a book with every drug in for children, for breastfeeding moms, for every specialty, you know, people who are elderly, young children, immunocompromised, on chemo, whatever. And basically, these house officers were given a new one every 6 months. So their old ones are just kept in their room. And as nurses, we, you know, can we have your BNF? And then we used to take it home and read and learn our drugs and all the side effects and things that they didn't work with, you know, other antibiotics or whatever. So yeah, we could learn and memorize our drug dosages, the contraindications, the side effects, and all the names by heart. And God help you if you didn't know. That's what's different now, I think, with phones and online information. It's useful and it's quick and it's easy to access. However, there was something about learning by heart your drugs, common drugs that is. You still had to look certain things up. You can't know every drug. But the common ones for your specialty, yes, absolutely. And not only that, learning the drills, you know, of how to deal with a cardiac arrest, how to deal with an intubation. So an anaesthetist putting a tube into the trachea so that you can ventilate the lungs. We didn't have a card. We didn't have a checklist. And I think it's useful, but I think there's a lot to be said for knowing off by heart that drill and any updates, because if it's not in your head and you keep relying on a computer, why train? But that's probably me just being old school. Anyway, where was I? The elderly patients that we looked after at that time had their year of birth starting in the 1890s. That's very true. On their case notes, which were always like brown card, handwritten very neatly in Ormskirk, everything was, even the notes were not tatty or anything. They were all new and clean and well kept. They had like 1890, 1895. Can you imagine what a stage in history that was? X-rays were copied onto plastic and viewed on a light box, or they were held up to the ceiling lights by some doctors. Blood results were phoned through from the lab and we copied them down by hand into the patient's notes with our name and signature, or we put them on it was a lab book. So you put the patient's name, date of birth, hospital number, and the results as we'd written them out on a notepad from the lab. Now it's a lot better, and that is where I say, you know, computers have definitely come into their own for that kind of thing, just, you know, quick. So yeah, computers are good for that. The hierarchy was very respected, and we were only called by our title and our last name. That's very true. Everybody was student nurse Morgan, student nurse Jones, student nurse Owen. Whatever your name was, you were called it. The hierarchy on ward rounds, it was consultant, senior registrar, SHO or senior house officer, I think they're called F2s now, and F1 or house officer. Then the staff nurse, the enrolled nurse, the student nurse, and it went down in a line. So if you asked questions, you had to go up the hierarchy. Thank goodness that's gone. But there was a level of respect, you know. People didn't know you as Jane or Diane or whatever. They just didn't. It was in front of patients, staff nurse this or nurse that. Never, or Dr. Jones. It was never informal. It was still quite strict then. All patients had a Gideon's Bible placed inside their locker, and lockers didn't have a lock on them because they weren't needed. Sign of the times. Things weren't stolen. You didn't have random people mooching around the hospital at night or day or wanting to come in and take things. It just didn't happen. And there was, you know, a modicum of respect. And the Bible was there for all faiths. So basically, you know, regardless of what religion you were, if you were dying, nurses used to or could read a passage of the Bible to somebody if there was no clergy available or no family member. Because at that time, Britain was relatively, you know, less multicultural. So it tended to be a lot of Christianity. So you called the Roman Catholic priest or the C of E vicar, reverend, and they would interchange, but they would also help people of faith as other faiths as well. So nobody was forgotten. Right, I'm doing it again. Relatives used to bring in flowers, and we used to have glass vases on top of the lockers. Yes, they used to bring in Lucozade, grapes and crosswords. Lucozade, does anyone remember that? Always grapes. Who wants grape when you're not feeling well? The hospital trolley sold sweets, newspapers and magazines. And above each patient's bed was a headset so they could listen into the hospital radio. Does anybody remember hospital radio? There was a DJ always on, and people used to come round, volunteers, and they'd give the patients a slip of paper and they'd say, do you want to write a dedication to whoever? And it was always to the nurses on Ward 8 or Dr. Smith on Ward 1 or whatever it was, you know, and they made the dedication. We couldn't hear it because it wasn't piped out to us. It was only on the patient headset. Anyway, thermometers that were usually above the patient's bed in some antiseptic were glass and mercury. There were oral ones which had a silver bulb at the end, and we had rectal ones with a blue glass bulb on the end. I have put on there, if you know, you know, because sometimes the blue bulbed ones ended up in people's mouths because somebody had put them in the little holder, and some student nurse had come along and said, open wide, Mr. Smith, and shoved the blue thermometer end in. It was clean, but you know, if you know, you know. Right, where am I? Yeah. So I told you this thing was long, didn't I? Blood pressure was taken manually with a stethoscope. So yeah, it was called a sphygmomanometer, and it had mercury in. And the cuff was made of cloth, and with a bladder, rubber bladder that you inflated around the arm, and you'd listen to the heart rate, which was very useful. And it's a skill that is taught now and again, or taught once, but people don't do it so routinely that when they have to do it, say on a very sick patient these days, it's a skill they can lose unless they learn to do it regularly. And in sick patients, low blood pressures, you know, it's the preferred method because the machines can give you a false positive reading. And it's not as accurate anyway in patients with low blood pressure. The equipment library, every hospital had an equipment library. So IVACs were just coming in, which were like little drip counters, and then old cardiac monitors. And we had one. It was like something from the Napoleonic War, and it was a bouncing ball, you know, like the green light it made was dying out, and there was a little gauge like on Opportunity Knocks, you know, like a clapometer, and it had the heart rate on. God, it was ancient, and it was also really, really heavy. So when you were carrying it, it was like two hands, and it was on a metal trolley next to the patient. They died out very quickly. The monitors, they were got rid of, but it was sort of like the tail end of the beginning of my training, that all this old equipment was still there. I'm sure it's definitely not now, because Ormskirk is a lot more modern than it was then. It used to be old World War II huts, because there was no money made to start developing the site. There was a start of the development in the psychiatric area, but the general area was still old huts, but lovely and very clean and very well maintained, and some of the best years of my life. Anyway, I lived in the nurses' home for £65 a month, including everything. So there was no council tax or TV license. Basically, your money was taken at source, and whatever was left of your salary was yours. So it was great. We had a social club, which was £2 a year to join, with a subsidised bar, a stage where we had pantomimes and shows based on the characters of the hospital, the characters being the consultants and the senior sisters. And it was really good fun. It was absolute hoot. Yeah, great days. And it sort of brought a family feel and a camaraderie to the hospital. We were like family, we lived in together, we drank together, we socialised together, we had parties together, and it was a nice time. It was a nice time to be young. Well, the 80s were, I feel, not perfect, but good, because you didn't have all the cameras in your face and things we've got to face now. Each Christmas, a small group of doctors and nurses used to be chosen. They used to try and hide from doing this. I got caught once as a first year, to sing Christmas carols around the Christmas trees that were in the ward. And we used to turn our cloaks, which I can show you a picture. The red side was on the inside. These cloaks were wool and lovely and warm, with the cross belt in red across your uniform. Not that anyone did that, or you were considered a bit nuts. But we turned the red outside in, and when the lights were dimmed in the ward, and we'd all be singing Silent Night or whatever, and those that were elderly or dying or whatever, felt a bit tearful because they were away from home, nurses used to sit and hold their hand. And of course, there were more nurses on the wards then, so they were able to give that care. So yeah, there'd usually be a house officer or junior doctor, a couple of student nurses, one of the sisters, one of the staff nurses, one of the enrolled nurses, a porter or two, and we'd all get sort of volunteering duties to go around the wards to do that. But again, it was a nice little touch. And the consultants' wives used to make cakes and bring them in for the patients. And when Christmas dinner was served, it was served on a big trolley that was heated. So the consultants would come in and carve a turkey. Seriously, there were plates, proper plates, nice little tablecloth, all Christmassy, teapot, cups and saucers. I mean, it was proper care, Yeah, it was lovely. And the cleaners and the auxiliaries, as they were called then, the healthcare assistants now, used to set the table, and, the patients would have a Christmas cracker and wear a paper hat. And I know that sounds really weird when I say it now, when you think about modern hospitals, but people were cared for. They really were. And that little touch was just amazing. And it didn't distract from, their medical care or anything like that. It was good old-fashioned care. And on the surgical wards, now I am digressing from this, sorry, I won't go for too long, I might have to make another video. One of the consultants used to have a dog called Bodie, and she was a black and white sheepdog, a proper working sheepdog, and she used to come in on the ward rounds, and Bodie would sit next to the consultant headmaster, and the patients would be sat there having that talk with the consultant about whatever, looking at this dog because they were more interested in that. And then the consultant would say, Bodie, shake Mr. Smith's hand. would lift its paw and the patients would shake the dog's paw. And the patients loved Bodhi. They'd cuddle her, and make a fuss of her. And yeah, it was really sweet because it was a rural hospital. That's what used to happen. And in the summertime, there used to be hens with their chicks walking from one end of the Nightingale ward to the other. Cats with a kitten in their mouth going through the wards when we used to open up the doors in the summertime. Honestly, I know it sounds crackers, doesn't it? It sounds really odd as I'm saying this. I'm thinking, what? But it was a different time. It was a caring time. You had time to care. You had time to take notice of people. It was just different. Anyway, I better shut up before I get into trouble, eh? Right, where was I? So, back to my tale. We lived and laughed together, and we were a team. We spent our free time studying. We had to learn, and we had to understand our role inside and out. We didn't need ID badges. That's true. No one ever thought to wander around a hospital to steal. It just didn't happen. Hospitals were safe areas, and doctors and nurses were respected by the public. That's true as well. A&E was quiet at night. Not silent, you still got, people who had strokes or illnesses or abdominal pain and things, or accidents and things like that. But it was nothing like it is now. Heaving, patients on trolleys against walls. It's a disgrace now. You can't give dignified care to somebody in a corridor. No way. And it doesn't matter how a hospital dresses it up as a clinical area. It's not a clinical area. It's a corridor. Anyway, I'm going to get on my high horse there, so shush, Debbie. Yeah, the occasional patient would turn up, but we didn't have long waiting times. We had what were called CAS cards because nothing was computerised then. So the patient's names and details were written on. A doctor or nurse would come along, take the card out the slot and say, "Hello, Mr. Jones, please, can you come to cubicle 6 or whatever?" And the patient would follow you in. But if we were all a bit naughty and we had some new junior doctors, we used to write some names on the CAS cards. Can I say it on YouTube? Maybe I can. Phil McCavity. I won't say the other one because it... Okay, Michael Hunt. Okay, so if you say that shortened and quickly, you'll get my drift. And we'd be sniggering in the background at the young doctor shouting Phil McCavity. Wasn't even there. But patients often went home anyway. They'd just get up and leave if they thought, "Oh, I'm not waiting 2 hours." 2 hours, you're lucky if you get seen in 12 these days. Anyway, we used to be able to joke and laugh at work. Yeah. I'll talk about that one another time because I'll have to choose my stories carefully. Yes, when it was quiet, we used to have fun. We used to read books, newspapers, have a takeaway together and have our lunch together in the doctor's office. Yeah? Cup of tea. At your desk. You're not allowed to drink now at a desk. Does anybody realise that? We have unpaid breaks. We didn't then. There were paid breaks. But now, doctors and nurses are not allowed drinks at their workstation because it looks unprofessional. So a urinary tract infection or a wee infection is on the rise in NHS staff, and that's okay to leave your staff dehydrated, but you can't drink at the desk. I'm going off on one again, sorry. Yeah, it's a bugbear of mine because I think these days I think it's ridiculous. I think it's about control, but there you go. We had to change out of our uniform in the changing area, and the laundry department washed and ironed our uniform. And they put them in a little locker, which was like 2.5, 3 sizes the size of a letterbox. And we'd have access to one side, and the laundry would have access to the other side. And they'd put our uniforms in because everything had your name and your year number. So we were SA 85, so everybody knew it was from there with your name. I've still got my linen hat, my hospital badge, and my silver buckle. My hospital badge from Ormskirk is solid silver. How lovely. And the hospital paid for those badges to thank you for your service and to put on proudly to display that you trained at that hospital. How nice is that? My silver buckle, your family buy that, or your husband, or whoever's closest to you. And mine was one of two, bought in a little shop in Chester, like a little jeweller's. And it was one of two. It was Sheffield silver, pure solid silver. And it came with a certificate. And back then it was £132. So back in 1988, that was a lot of money. And I've still got it and it's beautiful. I wouldn't part with it for the world. I'm going to hand it on to my children. Da, 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 da. So yeah, my linen hat, I've still got it now. I'll dig that up and show you some of these things, because we used to have to buy things like our own scissors, our own fob watch and stuff like that. So my linen hat, I had a plain one from when I was a first year, and we used to boil it in a pan, rinse it through, let it dry naturally, and then iron it flat with some spray starch, which you put on in very light layers till it was stiff. And you were given a little plastic bobble that you'd put in to make the shape. And I'll do that one day on a video. I'll show you how you make different hat shapes. And some hospitals had different styles of hats. That's for another video. But yeah, I've still got it. And you used to have to put white clips in so they couldn't be seen, because you had to be neat in your uniform. You had to have your hair up off your collar, your hat on so it was visible, your shoes were shined, no talc, getting talc on them or dirt or anything. You had to go to your locker and clean your shoes if that was the case. Your tights had to be black, navy blue or flesh coloured. And your shoes had to be rubber soled so that you didn't get any electric shock off the defibrillator or anything like that. But you were immaculate. Our uniforms were immaculate. We all looked good. Nobody looked scruffy, no way, or had anything visible on them. And that might seem a bit old hat with today, with tattoos and nose rings and things like that. But back then, it just wasn't a thing. It wasn't a fashion. Okay, so yes, sadly, and for the good, I've seen how the NHS has gone from a service to a business, and in my humble opinion, it's not for the better. That's going to be another video as well. There's going to be hundreds of them, because I want to mention about the history. I think I've touched on it in my previous videos, but I want to make a proper video about the history of the NHS and visit the places where you know, these things I'll talk about have happened, but we'll do that another time. And then I go on to list my courses, because NHS courses were free. Can you imagine that? Paid time off to study. Yep, and they were free. They were called ENB courses, or English National Board courses, and they were an NHS level, high level training course that you did after you got your RGN or SRN. So obviously I went into intensive care, critical care, pain management, cardiothoracic, so like heart, lung transplants, cardiology, that kind of thing, general ICU, dialysis, where I made my career. I did my teaching course, which was an EMB 998, and that became a postgrad diploma when I got my degree, because I added modules of teaching on there. And healthcare management, because I was in management for a time. I had my BSc, then my Masters, and I did some lecturing at Derby University. Worked in advanced practice, then agency, especially during COVID, because there weren't enough qualified intensive care nurses. So I was like as rare as hen's teeth. So as soon as anybody found out I had this EMB 100 course, I was snatched. Come and work. Come on, oh, we'll give you 3 patients and one of them's being dialysed. Great, okay, ladle it on. I didn't mind, but what I did mind was that the support workers, the nurses who were not intensive care trained during COVID, were earning £60 an hour. £60 an hour to my 45, 50 for being more. technical, hands-on, and taking responsibility for 3 ventilated patients, 1 or 2 of whom would be dialysed as well. So I was a bit miffed at that, and I think the same for the nurses who worked there permanently and were on NHS contracts. They really missed out. You know, they were earning like £20 an hour, and yet you had agency nurses. And I've nothing against agency nurses. I was one myself for a short time, but they were paying the army and agency nurses a lot of money for doing very little and very little responsibility. That's another issue as well, COVID. So yeah, it's been 4 decades of lifelong learning, and I'm still learning. I'm in a company now, and I don't regret it. I enjoyed my nurse training very much. I've enjoyed all the courses that I've taken. I've built up a wealth of experience, but just out of interest, I applied for a job. It was a band 5, like a new staff nurse's role, because if you leave the NHS now, regardless of your experience, you have to start at the bottom again and earn 27 grand a year, even with your degrees and all the experience I've got. And because I didn't, well, I could have been a bit nicer about it, I suppose, because I didn't toe the party line, because I wasn't woke, yeah, I didn't get the job. But it was given to some more deserving, perhaps overseas nurses, because the NHS doesn't want nurses like me. That's a fact. The NHS does not want nurses who are close to retirement or retire and return, unless they've worked in that area, retired and come back. That's a different story, because it's people who know people. But if you are not applying for a job that you're already known about at the hospital, they won't have you, because you're trained properly. When I go into a hospital and I do a shift as an agency nurse, my eyes are not glued to the computer. I don't need the computer. My eyes are on my patients. I know what is going on with them. I assess them. I look at them. I was trained about signs and symptoms. Today's nurses are trained very, very differently. And sadly, because they're younger and they've grown up with technology, that's what they're relying on, rather than looking at what's going on with the patient. And that's another story. I don't know whether it's deliberate or not, and it's ready for the private sector, because that's all very technical in terms of everything on the computer that's done, because it's legally a different system. Everything's about, you know, the detail of what you've given a patient so they can be billed for it. And they don't take patients who are as acutely ill. You know, the NHS does, and it's very fast paced. But I think we could do better in the way that we train nurses, because when I work with new nurses, I tend to try and impart my wisdom onto them to make them better nurses, because I think we could take something from the new training and a lot from the older training, especially when it comes to elderly care, paediatrics. A lot of nurses now don't do paediatrics. They don't do gynecology. They don't do maternity. So if a lady comes in, you know, about to give birth in A&E, they don't know how to deliver a baby. We did. We were taught it. We did psychiatry. We were trained in paediatrics. We were trained in obstetrics and gynecology. We weren't experts in that area, but we had to deliver 10 babies under a midwife's supervision and know how to use natural methods to get a uterus to contract and what to do if there's a problem or a bleed. Or it was completely different, because midwifery is now a subject on its own. Anyway, I'm digressing again. So I'm going to end this video here. I hope you found it interesting. Please give me some feedback, and as everybody says, like and subscribe, because I would like to do more videos like this. If you think it's too long or it's too much content, or if there's something you're particularly interested in within the NHS, ask me, because it's my favourite topic. I still read around the politics. I read a lot into the new management journals. I've been doing this a long time. It was my nurse tutor that got me into this, by the way, because he was a Royal College of Nursing rep as well as a psychiatric and a general nurse, and he was very focused on teaching his students about healthcare politics. So it got into my head, and I've been involved in it ever since. Um, so yeah, like, follow, subscribe. Let me know what you think of the content. Ask me some questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Okay, thank you. Bye.